Here we go. It is my pleasure to introduce Mark Manning from the NFLT Stewardship team. Mark joined NFLT in 2022, and he serves as our land manager. He joined the Florida Park Service in 2014, where he spent 7 years honing his skills in resource management and learning more about the incredible habitats and species that make our home here in North Florida so special. Since 2015, he has had the opportunity to burn most of Florida's pyric ecosystems, as well as learn from some of the best fire practitioners in the Southeast. So thank you very much, Mark, for being willing to have us all here today. And I will turn it over to you right
Awesome.
now.
Thank you so much, Abby. And thank you guys so much for taking time to do this right now. I know it's kind of the least thing on anybody's mind is to join a Zoom call because there's a death storm heading our way. So I don't know how to do Zoom very well, so I'll just try and figure this out and muddle through real quick. Sharing is not turned on, so I can get my little presentation on.
Did that
Okay,
work?
that worked.
All right.
All right, let's see. All right, are you guys seeing this wonderful image of Bogey Creek now?
Not yet.
Really? Sure.
There we go.
Okay, cool. Let me get this thing going. So yeah, um, welcome guys. We're going to talk about my favorite subject, which is fire. I feel like I talk about this all the time. But this is different because I haven't done a virtual on it yet. It'll be fun. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. Shout out to Rick and Faith for presenting this, so that we can make this happen. So we're going to talk about fire management. My name is Mark Manning, as Abby said. Been doing prescribed fire for a little while. Thank you guys so much for coming. I'm a certified prescribed burn manager with the state of Florida. Um, so I've been with NFLT since 2022, and this is going to be my 10th year of resource management, which I'm really excited about. It's been a journey, and here's a dorky picture of me in my PPE. Um, so I've gotten to work in some really awesome places since joining in this conservation world that we're in. I got to work with Ravine Gardens for 2 years as a temporary or year as a temporary ranger. And then I went over through lateral over to Anastasia State Park, which I had a lot of fun at. Got to learn about beach systems, coastal systems, and importantly, I got to join a prescribed fire team where I was there for 2 years traveling around to different parks and assessing their prescribed fire needs and learning about that whole world that I'm part of now. So that was 15 through 17. And then I went over to Goldhead Branch State Park, which Goldhead is interesting because it's become a site or a reference site point for the sandhill habitat community. So basically, when you're a land manager and trying to figure out what your sandhill habitat should look like, you go to places like Goldhead, which is, it's just the cream of the crop, basically. So got to hone my skills a little bit more over there. And then I threw lateral to NFLT, which I'm not leaving unless they drag me out kicking and screaming because I love my position here. It's been awesome. So, so a little bit about stewardship. We're basically a huge hat collection by trade. We are naturalists. We're heavy equipment operators. We're fire managers, exotic species managers, interpreters, or recreation planners, volunteer managers, and many more. And then a few things that were not by trade. Uh, we're arborists, electricians, small equipment repair men and women. We're tour guides, carpenters, plumbers, you name it, photographers, writers. And we speak a second language, and that is country folk, which helps us speak to people on our property boundaries and just get the job done. But I'm going to focus today on this hat. This is our fire helmet. Sorry if this presentation is dorky. I have a lot of fun making these. So to talk about and scratch the surface of fire today, especially in the time that we have, we're gonna go back in time and just talk a little bit about fire's use through time here. Um, so here's an image of just pretend like this is the Southeast. I tried to make this look as prehistoric as possible. This is actually an image from Waukesasa Bay on a fire that I was on. But so yeah, fire has been a natural process for a super long time. I mean, as long as there was vegetation to burn, there has been fire or some kind of cause to make this disturbance happen. Um, I put these words natural disaster or natural process because it's all contextual. So same goes with the hurricane that's coming. This is a chaotic disturbance that taken out of context with homes and cities and society, it's just a normal process that would cause disturbance and otherwise would be a normal thing. And fire's no different. Are a very normal thing. Um, and without cities and homesteading and population centers, basically, it would be a normal process that would be allowed to travel across the state. So little fun fact about Florida, matter of fact, Orlando is probably the lightning capital. We are the lightning capital of the nation of the US. Lightning capital of the world, I believe, is out in the Middle East somewhere, something like that. But for focusing on the nation, it's Florida. So and that's because we're a peninsula, because we're like right there in the middle of these waterways. That's why we get these competitive storms going across, creating thunderstorms. Um, Lightning capital. So we had ignition here in the state of Florida for a long time. Fire would begin and it would be allowed to just cruise across the state and do its thing until it ran into some kind of natural barrier, like a lake, a stream, some mineral soil, something like that, until they would shut it off, basically. And our habitats have become super accustomed to that. And just because we're back in time, I decided to throw in a giant ground sloth in there just for fun. Um, so here's an image of some of those firing patterns. So firing patterns that we think of in our world are head fire, flanking fire, and backing fire. So these are just fancy terms that means a head fire is the fire that's going with the wind. It's the most intense, and it's cruising through, but really it's a smaller portion of the fire as a whole. Then you've got flanking fire. Flanking fire is coming out to the sides, and then you've got your backing fire, which typically would have been the largest portion of the fire as it would go against the wind. And that's what we're seeing in this image here. Let me see if I can get my little laser pointer going. So you can see that fire in this picture. This is an image of Little Rain Lake, a fire we did there. You can see fire is laying over towards the black over here, but it's going in this direction. All the smoke and the wind is going this way, but it's still backing through the fuels in this direction. And that was the fire that would travel the furthest usually. Okay, so human fire influence. So people, how do you fit people into the world of fire? Since there's been people, there's been applications for fire. So I've got some images of some native people using fire to their advantage, and they're using it for most of the same things that we're still using them for today and how we've learned to use them. So they were using it for like clearing crops, just general travel. It makes it a lot easier when there's not a bunch of stuff and vegetation in front of you and your entire village, especially for nomadic peoples, and you're trying to move from here to there. Managing land for desired plant or animal species. Sure, there might have been a medicinal plant that germinated at a certain time of year, and they actually their natural systems would function better if they were being burned on the reg. So, and that goes for animal species as well. Flushing out games. I mean, this was kind of like dog hunting a little bit, but that's how you got food on your plate back then. And then reduce, this is a huge one. This is like one of the main reasons we use fire throughout the entire nation, which is reducing wildfire risk. near settlements. Yeah, native peoples were absolutely doing that. Um, so basically, anywhere near their settlement, they would burn out, fight fire with fire, have this big blackened area. So now fire can't cruise in there and take out their settlement, so they don't have to start over again. Um, but yeah, if you look at some of these images, you can tell a lot of these don't really look like the Southeast. A lot of these look like, Great Prairies somewhere in the Midwest or something like that, but still kind of the same principles there. Except for this image, this one kind of bothers me because it looks like they're actually trying to put fires out. So I don't know what's going on there. Um, oh gosh, oh gosh, there we go. So settlement area. So post-European settlement. Once we came in, once European settlers cruised into the Americas, they were noticing that the native peoples were using fire to their advantage. And up until that point, I'm not sure really of the history of European fire use just here in the States, but they were catching a little bit of what they were putting down. So they were seeing the advantages in putting fire on the land, but we're using it in a different way. So they were using fire observed by the native peoples, and we quickly adopted that. We used it to improve our forest productivity, and most importantly, rangeland forests, so those grasslands. Visibility and access, again, getting that vegetative cover out of the way so that you can move your cattle in a direction. It sounds like a little thing, but it's a big thing. And then this guy improved hunting lands, including whale habitat. So that was a very sexy, attractive sport back then. As hunting has always been a sexy, attractive sport, even when it wasn't just a necessity. You can see in this image down here, we've got an old image of some quail hunting here in the southeast. Here's some settlers that were using it on their rangeland. I had this image made by AI, by the way. That's why it kind of looks kind of funny baloney. And then up here, it looks like we've got some settlers that are chopping down some trees or dropping some timber and doing a fire to just clear out some of that brush so they can get their cattle in there. Um, so some other things that were going on that our little fire history view here. Um, we started to put an end to fires. So we had this big boom. Native Americans were using fire. White people showed up. We were doing fire too. And then things were getting out of control because we were putting things out in some areas and not other areas. So we had some really big, nasty fires in the late 1800s, early 1900s, including the big blow up of 1910. That was like a 3 million acre wildfire that happened in the Northeast. That really put things into perspective as far as forestry as a whole was concerned. I've got some images to like give you an eyeball of what early forestry was kind of looking like. It was these guys. You can see these guys are trying to put out a fire. This is what suppression looked like back then. Really dramatic images. And it all kind of led towards the Smokey Bear ad campaign, which was one of the most successful ad campaigns in the US or really in history. I mean, it was like a 50-year ad campaign of put it out, please put it out. We don't want another fire. Um, and it really started to blow up more towards the end of the 1930s when we were going into World War II. And I think this image captures all of that really. And there's a lot of images like this if you look them up. So it says, strike down this monster. Forest fires delay victory. You can see they're trying to build ships. They've got airplanes in here. I mean, it's all right there in the poster. We don't want to fight. We don't want to have to delegate resources to putting out a wildfire that's going to take out our communities and our city centers while we're fighting a war. That's a big money suck. So we don't want to do that. So that kind of went on until like the late 60s. So we're getting a little closer to where we are now. So the campaign ends in the early 70s. In the 1960s, biologists and habitat monitors were looking at things in terms of not game-related species, but everything underneath the umbrella of game-related species in these native species or in these natural spaces. And they were saying, hey, we're actually burning over here, and things are really getting better for all of the communities and the animals just under the game species, not just the quail, not just the deer. And that's when things started to kind of turn around. So now we can jump back on our silly time machine here, come back to modern day, and talk about some of the critters that are benefited by fire. I'm kind of a wordsmith. I kind of like the word pyro beneficiaries to measure this with a little bit. So I've got some images here. And these are just some of the plants and animal species that are all interconnected to fire, especially here in the southeast, which is my main focus, because all of our natural systems are defined by or dependent on fire now. So if I just kind of jump around here, you can see. So there's a color that indicates a relationship to the word. So this is kind of haphazard, but I think it helps. So this word serotiny, it's attached directly to the longleaf pine. Just this image right here. The longleaf pines, serotiny, is basically when you've got like a burst of heat, usually from a fire. That's like the main thing that opens pine cones for a pine tree, for them to be able to drop their seeds. That's what tells the plant, hey, the ground has just recently been burned. This is the best time to drop seeds so that they can get onto that light cover of soil, get stomped in by whatever species are walking around, and we're gonna continue to procreate. And then you've got some other animals through here, like you've got your pine snake here. This is habitat for them. They directly need fire managed habitats for them to be successful at what they do. Up here, this is everybody's favorite tortoise here in the southeast. That's our gopher tortoise. I've got this word keystone species, not because they're from the town of Keystone, but because they support a myriad, a suite of other species. So the gopher tortoise in its sandy community is one of the only animals that can dig a burrow. He's one of the only critters that can dig that hole. And especially for thousands and thousands of years of fire cruising across these landscapes, that became pretty important to all the critters that also lived there with the gopher tortoise because they needed a place to go whenever those fires were coming through. And that was the burrow. So thank you, Mr. Gopher Tortoise. There's somewhere around 340, 350 different species that all depend on the gopher tortoise burrow at some point in its life or their natural life cycles. Um, so you've got this guy here. This is our southeastern American kestrel. They specifically use those grassland savannas and other habitats that are dependent on fire. They depend on that landscape getting cooked off every couple of years so that it's nice and low so that they can see what they're hunting, which seems simple, but it's fact. And they're starting to rapidly decline as we continue to suppress fire in some areas. Um, you've got our gopher frog right here. Can tell by the first part of his name that he has something to do with this fella up here. So they depend heavily on gopher tortoise burrows, and they depend on fire cruising through and maintaining ephemeral wetlands in their habitat. So if fire doesn't make it to these seasonal wet, dry ponds, um, succession will take place and trees will start to grow up in that pond, keeping it dry. Suddenly they've got no place for them to lay their eggs. Um, and then you've got your Florida mouse here. You can imagine that they're snacking on all those seeds that are out there in the grasslands. And the grasslands themselves, like wiregrass, they depend on being burned so that they can have a higher viability chance for their seeds. Um, but yeah, that's some of the our pyro beneficiaries. Um, just to scratch the surface on Florida's our burn program. There's there's Aaron. The Florida Forest Service issues our burn permits. They're kind of in charge of that, not UAS. So I had the stat of 88,000 authorizations were issued just about each year here in the state of Florida. We're like the highest burning state out of any of them in the nation. It's a big deal to us. It's always been a right of ours, one that we need to protect. Um, so And there's a huge array of people that are using the ability to burn or those authorizations. Largely, you would think it was held to bigger agencies like the Florida Forest Service or, the state park systems, the feds, that kind of thing. But it's not just held to them. It's held to landowners too. Um, Joe Schmo, with a farm, anybody who owns land has the right to burn, and really these authorizations allow you to burn in more select windows, but they don't limit you from burning completely. You can, as a landowner, go out there and get authorization without this fancy certified prescribed burn management rule. And then prescribed burn associations, which Ben is a part of. Those are huge. So those are collaboratives of those landowners that have said, "I want to burn my property. I'd like to help you burn your property," and they are able to mesh equipment and resources. And most important is amount of crew assistance personnel. And they can spread that across especially here in North Florida with the NFPBA, they can spread that around and get more done to manage their lands. And then I just put prescribed fire councils here because I thought it was important to mention that they're kind of like our head leaders for making sure our laws are upheld. They're chief in giving us, passing down uh, information that's come across their panel so that we can all kind of be on the same page and that so that our Florida burn program can continue and be successful. So how do we get fire on the ground? How does NFLT get fire on the ground? We all do it different, but this is kind of the way that we've learned. So typically, to break down the madness, and the image on the left is Smith Lake Preserve. Those of you guys who are coming out to the 25th birthday, you guys will be here. Um, So basically, to make this less crazy, we define all of the areas within our management area or our preserve, say, into smaller little locations. Like you can see, if I zoom in here, um, you've got 1N, 1S, 5W. This just helps us break things up and know, um, first of all, so that if we're going to be applying prescribed fire to it or doing some kind of management to it, it's a little bit smaller and it helps us keep track of things kind of. Um, so we like to establish those management zones. It's very helpful. Fire lines are created. So typically those management zones are defined by a fire line that was already there or that we created to help break up the size of these places. So every one of these blue lines that you see on your map here, these are all roads that are broken down into mineral break. So like down to bare soil for the most part. And those help us break things up. And most importantly, stop fire if we were to have a wildfire and something for us to base on if we're doing prescribed fire. Um, a water source is identified. So if I zoom in here, right in this 2E, 2S area, you can't really see it, but there's a shop right here. This is where our shop's at. This is our water source. Without a water source, there's ways to burn without a water source, but yeah, it's better to have one. So it's typically how we put things out and how we keep things contained. So you need a water source. A prescription is written. Usually this happens, well in advance, months, maybe a year in advance. Um, I've burned with plenty of people that did it the week before, which is not ideal, but typically you have an idea. The prescription is basically just a piece of paper that you are saying I'm legally held to doing things the way I've dictated here on this prescription. So we kind of lay everything out and say, I want to do a fire here. These are the weather parameters that I need, da da da. That's all kind of filled out there, which I could spend a whole thing on. An appropriate weather day is selected for your burn, which is based off of your prescription. All those little weather parameters that you said, I need this wind, I need this humidity, I need these temperature ranges, I need this many days since rain or until rain. Um, an appropriate weather day is selected. Then you start sending out your crew requests for assistance. If you're a landowner, you could start reaching out to your buddies and to the Prescribed Burn Association folks that you've been working with up until this point. For us, as um, we're still a private landowner, but we're more familiar with working with other agencies like the Park Service or biological stations, that kind of thing, things in our areas, in our partnership areas. And we start reaching out to them and saying, hey, we need this equipment and this many crews so that we can do this. And then the day before, sometimes you can do it, almost 24 hours in advance. You can do it online or you can call the morning of to get your authorization from forestry so you can put that fire on the ground. And then you do it. You make the fire happen. So here's a bigger breakdown of that. It just includes a little bit more legend. But we'll jump into some of that more. So typically, this is your contingency map for us. So this is a broad map of what we look at. This is how we give our briefings when we have everybody stepping up to the plate and ready to burn with us. This is kind of what we tell, where we're able to describe where safety zones are, where water sources are, the breakdown of where management zones are, what we're burning, that kind of thing. And you can see in this image, there's a handful of things we were briefing people on. So these gray areas were recently burned areas. Those functioned as our safety zones. This orange line right here is the Florida Trail. For this burn, we needed to reroute the Florida Trail so that nobody got involved over here. And yeah, just it's an overview so you can see, oh, okay, off to the west, there's all there's a neighborhood over here. So fits into our briefing. And then typically we'll have a smaller, more broken down ignition plan map. So you can see this orange area was our target area for applying prescribed fire. We have some other letters to go off of for place markers, where we describe our contingency area. So for this instance, we plan to burn this to run into a natural barrier of like an oak hammock that was going to stop the fire. But if for some reason we were wrong and it kept cruising through there, we had all of this planned to burn as well. So that's just kind of how we break things down. That's usually the map that you'll find most crew are holding in their pockets the day of the burn. So the day of the burn, my job as the burn boss, first and foremost, after getting that authorization, is sending out notifications, and that will go off to uh, our next door neighbors. That will go off to sometimes sheriff's department, Florida Highway Patrol, maybe, depending on what we're burning. A lot of the time, I'm reaching out to the local. This is a big one, the local fire department, so that when people do see our smoke and they call in and say, "Hey, there's a fire right by my house," they can go, "Yeah, it's a prescribed fire. They gave us the authorization number. That's normal. They've got it under control. Let us know if it, for some reason, if it gets out of control." Um, so then our crew is usually showing up on site the day of the burn early in the morning. We're legally allowed to start putting prescribed fire down at 9 o'clock. So they show up with their equipment, everybody high fives, shakes hands, greets each other, haven't seen each other since the last burn. How's your mama? All that. Make sure our equipment's looking good. Then we conduct that briefing that I talked about. We talk about our expectations, our objectives, why are we burning it, and how we're going to accomplish that. Everything is briefed on. And then typically how we break things down is there will be a prescribed burn manager, someone who is the burn boss. So we'll say that's me. And typically, the crew that are under me will break out into at least two crews mostly. But if it's a less complex burn, you might have a lot less people and you might have a different strategy. But typically, we'll break out into two different divisions. There'll be a line boss here and a line boss here. And those are your main points of contact for everybody that's underneath them and all the equipment that they have. So after the briefing, we'll break out into those divisions and then we'll conduct a zone tour or what have you, whatever we've said we're going to do to get fire on the ground. So then we do it. We implement the fire um, and then mop up. So after we've burned, we'll take a look at it and see what needs to be cooled off or put out completely? What are our main concerns for holding, which is um, what are our main concerns for fire getting out of that zone into another zone or worse onto private property? How do we address those concerns? That's what we call mop up. We put out the areas that are critical to put out. And I wrote situational to fuels, adjacent lands, landowners, and then long range. Uh, Spotting is the word that we refer to, you know, fire getting up, over, and out of your burn and into a different burn zone, private property, could be further down long range. We're addressing all those things in the mop-up phase. And then the after action review, this is super important. So after we're done with everything, we usually get all collected, gaggled back up, usually where we did our briefing, and we'll do an after action review where everybody gets a chance to talk about what happened that day, what went right, what went wrong, and talk about our realistic expectations for the objectives we tried to accomplish, that kind of thing. So that's the goody gumdrops at the very end is the AAR. Uh, Hopefully it's not a shouting match at the end. It's like, why did you do that? And then crews released, I should say, non-necessary or basically the folks that we don't absolutely need, we will release, especially if they've driven a very far away, like an hour, hour and a half. We try to get them on the road and we'll continue mop up. And then once the fire is in a condition where we can leave, we will leave it for the day. And then our post-burn activities. I'm trying to zoom through these because I got a couple more slides. So we'll try to we'll do some further mop up for the rest of the days, especially since NFLT, we don't have a lot of burn history. So we're building up that burn history every couple of years. We'll apply fire again to the landscape and we're building up the ability for it to bounce back even better. But a lot of mop up, a lot of post-burn activities happen, especially with our unknown burn histories, if that makes sense. Um, so we're monitoring the burn over the course of the next month. So I'm usually kind of a little bit nervous for the first week or so, and then depending on how things look, it starts to get better usually. And then heavy emphasis the week of the burn, and then this is a big one. 2 weeks after the burn is typically where needle drop occurs. So that's when reburn can happen. So 2 weeks later, all your needles drop. If you do have something that's still cooking out there, it could catch, and then if you're not around and you're not paying attention, it could sneak up on you. And then we do it, throughout the month, especially with the habitats we have. And then monitoring of post-burn, return of vegetation. We're looking at, 6 months down the road because it's not always super apparent if you met all of your objectives. Like, say you've got an objective of we only want to burn, uh, we want less than 10% tree mortality or even lower than that. That's not going to be super apparent right after the burn. It usually takes months until you can really know that for sure. So usually we'll do a 6 month post-burn evaluation. And then I've got a video I want to show you guys. Um, I think it's going to come out more like a slideshow, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, so this is a view from the fire line, and I apologize for my connection. I'll try and share this afterwards. These fires at Little Rain Lake were in preparation to burn or to plant 82,500 longleaf last December. Here's some burns at Smith Lake Preserve. These are some of our pastures. Just trying to keep those clear of thatch as we get ready to do things like ground cover restoration, try and reduce that thatch layer so that when we're ready to put those in the ground, we can burn them, herbicide them when they come back, and start working on getting the seeds into the ground. But here's some more Smith Lake if you guys can see that gallberry grassy element. This was some scrub that we burned in the presentation, the one that I was showing you guys where we had to move the trail. That was this guy. So what we did was come through, cut down the gallberry down low. Gallberry bounces back really, really quickly, so it's not unheard of to cut it down first. It's a scrubby species, and we got it down low so it would be safer for us to burn. And then we cooked it off in March, which is the best time to burn scrub in my opinion. Well, a beginning scrub burn. I don't know if you guys can see some of these aerial shots. This is my first time flying a drone over a fire that we were doing. I was kind of scared to do that, but it was worth it for the imagery. And again, I'll try and get with Abby to make sure that this works as like a real deal video for you guys and able to stream it somewhere. Maybe we can get it up on YouTube so it's available to everybody. Okay. I don't know where you're at in the video, but here we are in Putnam Lakes Preserve. We got Mr. Crispy, our land management specialist. He's using a Foxfire unit. This is the fastest way, especially to get grasses to get cooking. Basically a glorified flamethrower on the back of an ATV. Really takes a lot of the walking out of it if you have the habitat to do so where it's safe. And what they're burning right now here is some ephemeral wetlands, part of an ongoing project to um, get much better habitat around our ephemeral wetlands for frogs and amphibians. Yeah, and here's a night burn that we did. I got to join Ordway Swisher. I live right next to the Ordway Swisher, so I get to work with the UF folks a lot. This is my first ever night burn. Very cool. Okay. So yeah, with that, here's some fire stats from 2023 and 2024. 320 acres burned across 7 days last year, and then here we are in 2024. 285 acres burned so far. 8 burn days. One of those was scratched because we had bad weather. And we've got another 150 acres planned for December. So with that, I'll turn it over to Abby and everybody, and we can maybe take some questions.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you, Mark. That was incredible. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully you guys did too. There is one question already in the chat, so I'll turn it over to Brenda to field that one. And then if you guys have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Or I think you should have the ability to unmute yourself and start your video if you'd like to ask questions live. Brenda, take it away.
Okay, so we have a question here. Are there any precautions taken for tortoises or other slow wildlife, or are they used to it?
I would say the best way to answer that question is their adaptations allow them the ability to survive these fires, but also our firing pattern has a lot to do with it. Once upon a time, it was common practice to take one of those management zones, say it looked like a box, and they would just light around the entire thing and it would close together and burn off, and they would lose like 100% of this wildlife. That wasn't, a bird. So
Hmm.
we don't burn like that anymore. As I said, we have two divisions typically, two team captains, and they will instead take that square. One line will take the fire up this way, another will take it this direction, and we'll allow the fire to slowly push this direction instead of doing this big circle fire, and then if you're standing on the right side of it, tortoises and slower wildlife, they'll either exit the zone or they'll get down into their burrows while everybody else that's
Hmm.
on foot will get pushed out very, very slowly. And if you're on that end, you can see all this wildlife you've never heard of just come out in like this cool parade of weird bugs and everything else.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions?
There's one more, Brenda. I don't know if you saw that one.
Mm, let's see. Well done. Okay, the next question, was the above view shot from a drone?
Yes, that's from a drone, and that's Little Rain Lake
Hmm.
Preserve, which I'm thinking it would be cool to rename it Guitar Pick Lake because it kind of looks like a guitar pick to me.
What about, Mark, the goals for 2025? So you shared stats for 2023 and plans for the rest of 2024. What
Mhm.
are the plans and goals for next year?
So I don't have those fully in front of me right now. My plan was to try and because Rihanna, I don't like to be challenged. I like to blow through any kind of challenge that's issued to me. And Rihanna was like, "Hey, you got 320 last year. Shoot for 400 this year." So I'm trying to hit 500 somehow. And then once we jump into 2025, it's all based on your burn windows and your burn season. So we have a heavier burn season in the kind of like January, December through April. And then we kind of dial back and start helping our partnerships because our habitats aren't really ready for summer burning. And then we'll jump back into it again, typically in the winter. But we are doing little tiny burns through that, through the growing season period.
What about additional
Happy.
resources that are required for burning, and what would it take to kind of expand the burn program?
To expand our burn program, um, really, I think we're starting to get to where we have the equipment. We just need the hands, I like working in partnerships and there's a bit of a checks and balances that's involved with that. If it's all just all these people from one team, that's great and we can accomplish things and we can go that route. But it's also cool to bring in these other partnerships from all around because when you get these bigger burns, not only have you scratched their back in the last season, like, hey, remember we helped you burn 1,000 acres last year, why don't you come over here and help us? So we can also rely on them for that, but they also have different practices than us. So it kind of keeps us from becoming this new thing instead of staying with the group and being this strong uh, fire program in Florida, I think.
Okay. Let's see. Next question. Mark, what is the perfect weather for a burn?
Oh my gosh, perfect weather. It all depends on what you're trying to burn. So we'll talk about Sandhill. For us at North Florida Land Trust, maybe at Smith Lake or Little Rain Lake, a nice windy day, you know, not super gusty, but something that's going to really push our fire in a predictable fashion. We're also looking for, depending on when the last rainfall came, maybe a drier day. So maybe, a 40 RH, something like that at the lowest would be amazing. But it all depends on what time of year you're doing it at. Um, and we have a lot of things that we can burn out of the north with a wind coming from the northwest heading southeast. So that wind direction is really good for a lot of our zones at Little Rain Lake, Smith Lake, because it pulls it away from um, uh, what's the word? It's basically sensitivity areas like big roads, like State Road 21, schools, big neighborhoods, things like that. For whatever reason, northwest is the magic wind for a lot of
Hmm,
our zones. So.
Great. Do you have any burn plans for Bogey Creek, or is it too close to housing divisions?
I think so, but I think a lot needs to happen before we can get to that point. Bogey Creek, if it were to catch on fire right now, I don't know what we would do. It would be really, really bad. And
Mm,
that's the position a lot of habitat in Florida is in now because of fire suppression, like we talked about earlier. So it's allowed that fuel accumulation to just keep piling up and piling up. And now all of those trees that are out there that are covered under this organic layer, they've put their little feeder roots out into that. And now if they were to get cooked off, a lot of those trees will go. So we have to have that magic weather pattern. We've got a lot of prep work to do, but I think it's doable, and I do want to tackle that someday.
great, thank you. One final, are there volunteer opportunities?
I think we're taking a step back and looking at where we fit in with other organizations and how we fit into our MOU with them. Um, Basically, we're in this big group MOU that says this is how I play on the playground. I know you guys play different on yours, but this is a document that says we're all allowed to work together. So I think we're trying to change some of that and get into a position to where we're playing ball on the same level as other folks, which means some of our volunteer opportunities may change. But that just might mean we need to add a training before volunteers can set foot on the fire line with us. And it might just be a list of equipment that they need to be at least wearing or have on their person until they can set foot out there with us. Um, but I really have high hopes for keeping it an open thing like it has been. It's been a very creative field for us. Whereas when I worked for the state, it was like, no, if you haven't had this training, you're not allowed to come out there. We don't want you out there. We have too much on the line. I think that's silly, and I think there's ways to approach it. So I want to keep that open to us. So me and Rihanna just need to powwow on that, on what our specifications are going to be.
Great. Any other questions? Okay.
Last call. No. All right. Well, thank you again, Mark, for sharing with us. This was a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and it sounds like we've got some folks interested in burning. So if that pans out for the future, that could be pretty cool.
That would be great.
I do I do want to remind everybody that this session has been recorded. We'll get that out as soon as possible so that you can enjoy it and share with some friends and family. Our next presentation will be on Wednesday, November the 13th. Our staff member, Kim Hall, will be talking about day-to-day acquisitions at NFLT. And one more time, I'd like to thank Rick and Faith Hoffman for presenting this and all of the presentations in our Working Lunch Wednesday series. Thank you all. Stay safe in Milton. Please let us know how how you're doing after the storm, and we hope to see you next month. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.